that we will have this for the Georgia Association. So my name is Beth Guyton. I'm a CPHQ. I started my own little consulting firm called Interactive Quality over 10 years ago because crazy idea I had, but I had been a sales rep calling on hospitals for over 22 years and understood how sales reps with absolutely no authority could go into a hospital and change the way they practice medicine, and just found it mind-boggling back then that simple things like core measures weren't being followed. And I thought I really could bring something to the table by teaching hospitals how to use what was a very proven technique of educating and influencing people to change behaviors as sales reps did, selling, drugs and different technical things. So I thought, instead of selling an anesthesia drug or an IV antibiotic, let's sell quality best practices. And so that's how I started my company. But really what ended up happening was I got hired a lot to do culture change and leadership development. I've done a lot of work putting processes in place for improving patient experience and really just any type of metric that the hospital was moving towards. So kind of an interesting journey, but that's what brought me to where I am now. I have a lot of passion and interest around caregiver burnout and well-being. I began working on resiliency before I even knew what COVID-19 was or thought there might be a pandemic. Because if you had asked me about 5 years ago what I thought the greatest problem facing healthcare in the US was, I would have told you burnout. And so even though a lot of organizations maybe weren't giving it the attention that it deserved, 5 years ago, I think now with COVID, it can't be ignored. So that's both a good thing because it needs to be addressed, but it's a bad thing because the problem has escalated so much with the pandemic. Some other things, I have a real passion around ethical leadership, which is just like servant leadership, a well-defined thing in the academic literature, really shown to drive trust and commitment to organizational initiatives. And so you can understand why that would be of importance to me. I've also done a lot of work around accountability and helping leaders understand that they can't make anybody do anything, but how can they set the stage, to motivate, inspire people to become owners and be more accountable. So that's another thing I have a lot of passion around. And I'll share a lot of things about resiliency today. But another thing I'm real proud of is in 1 month, I will complete my master's in industrial and organizational psychology. And the only reason I wanted to mention that is because it's a wonderful degree that a lot of people don't know about. And I just want to share a very little bit of what it is in case any of you are thinking about pursuing a master's, because I think it probably wouldn't be on your radar, but it's super applicable. So it's really the scientific intersection of individuals and organizational performance. So there's a really strong stats background because IO psychologists create the psychometrics around how do we measure latent variables such as what motivates somebody or what drives trust. So those things that aren't visibly observable, but more of a psychological dynamic. So that's kind of interesting. And just that understanding of statistics and variability applies to process improvement as well. Other things that you might be familiar with that stem from the work of IO psychologists are things like human factor design, as well as the team steps model that was created by an IO psychologist whose specialty is teams and leadership. So anything having to do with the human intersection of performance and organizational performance would be in that realm. So again, I just am so passionate about that work that I'm doing and wanted to share that in case anybody was interested. So now moving on, I just have this welcome slide from Jarvis and Catherine Garcia about the Georgia Association for Healthcare Quality, just really letting you know what's coming up. They're pulling together, trying to offer a program each month and really need some help with volunteers to put these programs together. So I would encourage you to join the advisory board if you have any interest, especially if you're in a place in your career where you're really trying to network and develop your career. It's a fabulous opportunity. I will tell you, about 11 years ago, I joined the Texas Association for Healthcare Quality, which unfortunately is no longer around, but then there's also a North Texas Association, and I volunteered as their education chair. And to this day, I'm incredibly active in that group. So grateful for all the colleagues and friends I've made through volunteering with that group. And it's really helped me grow personally and professionally. So I would just encourage you to get involved if you have any interest in doing that. You're aware of today's program. In April, there'll be a program, Understanding Quality in Skilled Nursing Facilities. And then the May program is still under development. So if there is a hot topic you're interested in seeing, you may want to reach out to Jarvis Gray or Catherine Garcia and just see how you might be able to get involved with that. All right, so today we're going to talk about burnout and resiliency and how that connects with patient safety. So our learning objectives are for you to be able to identify 3 symptoms of burnout, for you to be able to identify, or I'm sorry, define resiliency, describe how clinician burnout impacts patient safety, and then list at least 2 categories of personal resources that can be developed by individuals to enhance their resiliency. And I'll present a very simplistic model for 4 categories. And then also describe what's one organizational level strategy that could be put in place, what's one team level strategy, and again, one specific individual level strategy. So let's get started. If you are not familiar with Through the Eyes of the Workforce, I strongly encourage you to become familiar with it. This is not a new publication. It came out very late 2012 or early 2013. It was first put out by the Lucian Leap Foundation for Patient Safety, and you may be very familiar with his work. He's also done some wonderful, it's like a 2-part series he put out. He's a physician, but really advocating against disruptive behaviors for a culture of respect. And so at that time, there was a very clear understanding that a hostile or stressful work environment impacted patient safety. And so I think this is the first really strong, well-published, well-accepted, well-read work really connecting the 2. And again, if you have not read this article, I would definitely recommend it. And in the back, they have a lot of great practical solutions that you can put into place in your organization if any of the items that they address seem really relevant for you. But there are just an exorbitant amount of articles and data connecting burnout and patient safety, showing that it's negatively related. So as we see burnout increasing, we see patient safety decreasing. And so just some significant things. There was a study, and I'll have a little bit more on this, but a significant negative relationship between burnout and the quality of care in a meta-analysis of over 82 different studies. So I would definitely recommend, if you're trying to build a business case to convince your executives of this connection, that's a great article to look at. Also, some different individual articles, just burnout and stress leading to decreased patient safety. That came out in 2006. And it's just kind of fascinating as you see different researchers building the case around addressing burnout. The earliest studies actually were on the connection with patient safety. And then it was hard to get traction and a commitment to dealing with the problem. And then you begin to see Shanafelt, which is the next study I have on here, saying that it's a predictor of medical error. But he really focused a lot on how it impacted the physician, the clinician, and struggled to get traction that way. And then you begin to see the business case around the money and the cost of burnout. But just looking at the connection to patient safety, you see Shanafelt really calling out the connection with medical error. There have been studies showing that nursing burnout is associated with higher infection rates. Also, that burnout is a predictor of both clinician-related and objective patient safety. So what that means is when the clinician's having to make a decision and they're not at their best, they're burnt out, they're going to make more errors, and there's going to be patient safety issues. And then just in general, objectively, not just from the physician standpoint, we see when organizations are experiencing a lot of burnout in their clinical staff, then patient safety is compromised. And there's also likely, makes common sense, but a bidirectional relationship between burnout and medical errors. So if I'm a physician, I'm really burnt out and fried, I am more likely to make a mistake. And then when I make that mistake, it's just kind of like a really negative cycle. I feel more burnt out, I feel less confident in my abilities, and I'm likely to make another mistake. This is also interesting from Press Ganey, and this was more recent in 2017. They're calling out, for the first time ever, the top challenges identified in healthcare are stress and burnout. And so I think it's important that they brought that to light because there's a lot of money on the table with patient experience. And so this is just showing, hey, this is a problem. This is a barrier to us achieving a better patient experience, which we also know is connected to patient safety, but that has real financial implications for organizations. And this is another study, and I believe with all my heart, I was talking to one of my friends who's also a CPHQ, and I said, I really think that, and this is just my opinion, but I really think that NAHQ is going to have to adjust the competencies to pull some of this in because of the connection is so strong with patient safety. And I don't think you can ignore burnout or the fact that when people are burnt out, they leave the organization at a much higher rate. So you have that high rate of turnover. And without retention, you really cannot put best practices in place and sustain them. And so there's so many, like just when you have the burnout clinicians still working for the organization, it can be a struggle and compromise patient safety. But then when they turn and leave and you have a really high turnover rate, a really high vacancy rate, it's almost impossible to have best practices known throughout the organization and followed consistently throughout the organization. So it just has such strong implications for quality of care and patient safety that I think that there will be an opportunity. I can't imagine that there wouldn't be to incorporate this into some of the quality professionals' role. Not that it would be fully the quality professionals' responsibility, but clearly to collaborate with HR and even administration to put things in place to really ensure the well-being of staff and the fact that good staff are retained. So this is just a quote from this article. This review illustrates the need for healthcare organizations to consider improving employees' mental health, as well as creating safer work environments when planning interventions to improve patient safety. So clearly it's a piece of the puzzle. And this is a nice study because, again, it's a meta-analysis. They looked at a lot of studies evaluating clinician well-being, and 16 out of 20 studies found a significant correlation between poor clinician well-being and a decrease in patient safety. And then measuring burnout, 21 of 30 studies found a significant association between burnout and patient safety. So the cost of burnout to the US healthcare system is huge. Again, initially, there was a lot of data around how it really compromised patient safety and there was harm to patients, struggled to get traction around addressing the problem with that type of information, moved to looking at the high personal costs for caregivers. You see a lot of work from Dr. Shanafelt, who's associated with Mayo, and they've been collecting data for over 15 years now on the impact to caregivers, but seeing higher rates of suicide, substance abuse, broken relationships, and depression among specifically physicians. But of course, this impacts all healthcare workers really. And then many clinicians leaving the profession. And with COVID-19, we're seeing that to be an even bigger problem. Prior to COVID-19, it was estimated that we could attribute about $17 billion in the cost of burnout. I've seen in the midst of the pandemic, I think it was in September, I saw a presentation from someone from Health Catalyst, which they're just a repository, like collecting data around patient safety issues, saying that they estimated it to be about 64 billion. I would guess the numbers are even higher, but right now we can't even get a feel for where that really is. So let's shift to understanding a little bit about what the problem is. So burnout is a prolonged response to chronic emotional and interpersonal stressors on the job. And it's defined by three very distinct dimensions. One is exhaustion, one is cynicism with detachment, and then a feeling of being just ineffective. So you lack a sense of confidence, accomplishment, and self-efficacy. And it's important to know that it occurs at the intersection of an individual worker and the work environment. It's really like we see the symptoms in individuals, but it's really not an individual's problem. It's a problem that happens at that intersection between the individual and the work environment. And so just to take a closer look at the 3 dimensions of burnout, the first is just overwhelming exhaustion, and it really is the most obvious symptom. And just another note that I think is important to realize, whenever, most academic studies that you read, for someone to be considered burned out, they may just exhibit one of these 3 symptoms. They don't necessarily have to exhibit all 3 to be classified as burned out. So, and being burned out is different from stress. Like, we all experience stress, but as the stress goes on and over a prolonged period of time, then burnout occurs. So exhaustion is just the most obvious symptom, and it is a direct result of this ongoing stress. And people just feel exhausted on every level. Physically, emotionally, they just don't have the energy that they used to have. And it really causes changes in behavior, because that individual is feeling so exhausted that they have to self-preserve. And so you kind of see the next thing happening with self-preservation. So they kind of become cynical, and they take care of themselves by detaching. You can almost think of it as an individual building a wall around themselves, and they begin to feel very negatively towards the work that they're doing. Something that was once fulfilling just is a pain to them now. They just dread going to work. And they also begin to feel negatively towards coworkers, to the organization as a whole, and to patients even. And so they'll detach and distance emotionally, and they even begin to see patients more as inanimate objects, kind of ignoring what's unique and engaging about patients, which is really heartbreaking, because that's the thing that maybe used to fill their cup. And so to self-protect, they cut themselves off from that, just because they don't have the energy to cope with the stress anymore. And then they begin to feel very ineffective. So the sense of self-efficacy, the feeling they can do a good job, they can problem solve, just goes away, and everything becomes less fulfilling. So when burnout is occurring, people go to work, they're almost dragging themselves there. They're very exhausted. They're not really connecting and filling their cup up with social interactions. And at the end of the day, they don't feel like they did a good job, and they just feel more tired. And so it's a really bad cycle that happens. And then we can look at organizational drivers of engagement and burnout. And you'll see this slide again towards the end of the presentation. This comes from Shanafelt, and there's a very similar list that came from Christina Maslock, who has done most of the work on burnout. And she's probably started researching the topic in the 70s. She too has done a lot of research in healthcare, and the World Health Organization uses her Maslock burnout inventory as the gold standard for measuring burnout, which is just another important thing to know. So, so these are the organizational drivers. And as I read through this, I just want you to think how somebody with quality and process improvement knowledge could contribute to addressing some of these drivers of burnout. So the first is workload and job demands, efficiencies and resources. And I kind of think of those 2 things really going together. We know the medical record is a huge piece of stress for clinicians. And so any processes that are very inefficient, or when a worker feels like they don't have the resources, even if it's just time, because there's not enough staff, on the team to get something done, that is really going to create a dynamic that is incredibly stressful. And if it goes on for a long period of time, will definitely create burnout. Then there's meaning in work, culture and values, and control and flexibility. And so meaning in work, like to have meaning and purpose in work, is so powerful, and it's so energizing. And you can see how that might pull you through on some days that aren't so great, because you can see a broader picture and feel like you're really contributing on a higher level. So if you're feeling, once you start to feel burnout, that kind of goes away, because you lose sight of the impact of your work. And then how well the culture of the organization and the values align with that individual's culture and values is really important to helping overcome the inevitable stressors and protecting against burnout. And to the degree that an organization can live out their values, really bring them into their daily operations, can be very powerful to guard against burnout as well. Control and flexibility is all about individual autonomy. So to what degree, how can processes be put in place for patient care that will allow the clinician to have the greatest degree of control and flexibility about how they take care of patients, how they go about the work, in a way that still preserves best practices and safety. But that's another real challenge, because when people feel that they have no control, it just takes away self-efficacy and any empowerment that you might have, and that can be feel very defeating. Social support and community at work, and a lot of that can be driven by the individual team leader, on the unit or department level. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then work-life integration, which really probably falls more to HR policies, but is an important thing to understand and know about as well. So those are the organizational drivers of both engagement and burnout. And just another quick note, a lot of people see engagement as the kind of the opposite of burnout. Some academic studies recently have shown that's not 100% true, but you can kind of think of engagement as having energy and vigor for your work. So if you're an engaged individual, you wake up happy and excited to go to work, eager for the day. When you're burnt out, you're just exhausted and depleted, and you're dreading going to work for the day. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what resiliency is. In the simplest sense, it's really the ability to bounce back from adversity. So when we're resilient, what it looks like is we're able to interact with our environment and its stressors, no matter how stressful they are, in an optimistic and adaptive way, with a focus on purpose, human connection, and personal growth. And all those words you see in green are super important, and we'll talk about them as we move forward. But they're all important, but that adaptive, flexible piece is really relevant. And then I just kind of call it time bending, but there's a very temporal element to resiliency, because the people who are the most resilient are not spending time focusing on the past, things that they may feel bad about, regret, rumination, guilt that they can't change. And they're not spending tons of time worrying or being fearful or anxious about the future. They're firmly grounded in the present. Things are happening in the present. They're aware of them. They do bend time in that they draw on successes and learning experiences from their past, to bring into the present moment to help them. And they're always able to, at the same time, kind of hold a sense of optimism, hope for the future. And so that ability to be grounded in the present, but draw in a beneficial way on the past and the future, is a really important skill for resiliency as well. And it's also good to understand that resiliency, like, again, we see burnout as a problem that occurs, or, we see a symptom. It looks like the problem resides in the individual, but it really is in that intersection between the work environment and the individual. And resiliency, again, at the end of the day, an individual is resilient, but it's a multidimensional process that relies on resources at multiple levels. So definitely at the personal or the individual level, but also at the team level within organizations that can be very social. We need social support, and individuals should gain kind of social support in communities that they're a member of. Maybe it's a place they volunteer, maybe it's a faith community, maybe it's their family, and neighborhood. But that sense of community, that social piece, is really important. And then at the organizational level. And I mentioned resiliency is a process. So this is really what the process looks like. There's some hardship, something that arises in our environment. It's out of our control. So it just happens. So there's this external event, and it just rocks our world. And then the next piece is so important, and it's called absorption. And so individuals have to be able to absorb the event and really all the implications of that event. And social support is so important, but the most resilient people, to a large degree, can stand with the hardship on their own and not say, hey, this hardship defines me, this hardship is me. They kind of can be almost a neutral observer, taking in, absorbing all the elements of it, and still stand. Like, they don't have to like what they're kind of understanding and processing through, but that they can face it and they can absorb it. And it's through this this absorption process that we begin to transform and build resiliency. So what often happens, and you can think, I know 2020 was the worst year of my life, very hard. So you may be able to draw on some experiences you recently had moving through this pandemic and think about, did you redefine your values and your priorities? Did you start to look at things in a different way, and were you able to take on a different perspective? So maybe what appeared as a problem, you could kind of look at in a little bit of a different way. Were you able to reassess, like, what's really important? What are my goals? What are my expectations now? Because there was a lot of readjustment that had to happen. And so then you may have adjusted, your expectations, but also your approach. How are you going to go even about your day? What are your short and long-term, goals at this point now with this new information, with this pandemic? And then sense making is really important too. So as individuals, we are happier when we can organize things. We see goodness as things that are kind of compartmentalized, organized, put together. When there's chaos, it's very stressful for us. It's just part of how we are. So we need to make sense of this, bad thing that happened, even if it's something very traumatic. And how do we organize and assimilate that information in a way that we can make sense? And that takes both sorting out our emotions, but there's also a very cognitive element of organizing the different components of it. And then as we go through that absorption and transformation process, we build resiliency. And so these are the 4 aspects of personal resiliency resources. And just understand that building resiliency is a very complex topic. There's not just one single recipe for doing that. And so by putting these things into these broad categories, it is kind of a simplistic way to look at a very complex topic, but I think it's helpful because we can wrap our brain around it and begin to kind of just bite off a little piece and chew and swallow it. So and also understand that these 4 categories don't exist in a very clear, hard lane where there's not overlap. There's actually tons of overlap. And it's kind of a cool thing, because if you can build a little bit of something in one of these categories, you're probably going to open the door and begin to build in other categories. So the first one is just positivity. And that includes things like having hope, having optimism, being curious, having a learning mindset, and just realizing, hey, I can choose the way that I'm going to think about this bad thing that happened, or this situation. Like, do I have to call it a problem? Let me get curious and think of other ways that I could see this. So it's really empowering yourself with that positive thinking. And then meaning and purpose is just about being really clear on what's important to us. What do we value? What gives our life meaning and purpose? And allowing the choices that we make, our behaviors, to really be very tightly aligned to what we know to be most important to us. And I listed gratitude in this category. Gratitude is one of the most powerful things. It's a lot. If you have extra time and you want to learn about something, I would say that's a great thing to research a little bit. But it really could go, it fits in almost any of these categories. Gratitude is known to enhance every aspect of well-being and really just increase life satisfaction. And there's a strong connection to being grateful for the things that give you meaning and purpose, but it also really drives positivity. When we're grateful for other people, we connect with them. And just all that makes us feel stronger and more empowered. So it does. That's one of the most powerful things on this slide. Human connection, we all know and have read the studies on how as we age, important those social ties are for both physical and cognitive health. And so in the same way with resiliency, that interconnection, there's an interconnection with self-empowerment and knowing yourself, and being self-aware and self-regulation to being able to connect more effectively with others. But so those skills are very tightly wound, but you can see how human connection facilitates our well-being, but it also helps us to feel more effective. It helps us to connect with our meaning and purpose, and to stay positive. Some important skills under human connection, in addition to just like what we'll touch on in self-empowerment, that self-awareness piece, are things like effective communication, being a really good listener, being able to have compassion and empathy for others and connecting that in that way, being able to coordinate, your needs, your desires with what other people need. And so again, that relies on that self-awareness and self-knowledge. And I've already kind of touched on empathy and compassion. And so just remember, to have meaningful relationships with others, we need to first have a good relationship with ourselves. And a lot of that is embedded in the self-empowerment bucket at the bottom. So people who are the most agile are really the most self-aware. And it all starts with them being able to take a very honest assessment of their strengths, but also the gaps, the things that maybe they need to work on. And we all have things we need to work on. So that's an important piece of that, is being able to be honest with yourself, to continually be searching for more information about your strengths, how to play those up, the things that maybe, you need to work on controlling a little better, or just keeping an eye on, watching out for, enhancing your self-knowledge, your self-control. It's also things like a healthy lifestyle. It's hard for anybody to be at their best when they don't take care of themselves. If you're not getting enough sleep, exercise, eating right, giving yourself mental breaks, doing creative things, all those things that drive well-being. And then our competencies, because we all have natural talents and abilities, but we can also really develop competencies. And the more that we feel like we can do well, then when problems come up, we can draw on those skills and competencies to accomplish goals, to move through struggle. So that's really important too. Okay, so I'm going to focus in on journaling to build personal resiliency, and I will tell you, this is something I'm very passionate about. I'm working right now, and I'm going to talk a little bit about mindfulness too. I'm a chronic learner. I love learning, but in 2020 I got a certificate on mindfulness facilitation, and just began a personal daily mindfulness practice, and just reading, a lot of academic stuff on it. And I'm convinced that it can really be transformative for individuals who are open to it. But journaling alone, and then I'll talk a little bit about mindful journaling. Journaling is a wonderful way to build personal resiliency. There's a fair amount of data on gratitude journaling. And, we don't have, it's great if we have the time to journal every single day, but studies with gratitude journaling saying even if you just do it once a week, it really is powerful. There's also studies about writing letters of appreciation or gratitude to someone and then delivering it in person, and just how powerful that is to boost people's positive emotions. So that's kind of another interesting idea. Just in general, journaling offers the opportunity to grow and develop and really connect with a lot of those really all four of those categories we kind of went through on the previous slide, but it offers the opportunity for self-discovery, self-knowledge, sense-making that's so important. It's an emotional outlet. And that's one of the wonderful things about journaling. Like, studies show, if journaling is just about, talking about how you're angry or getting emotion out on the page, it's not going to be as beneficial. What you really want to do is have a safe place to release emotion, but at the same time to cognitively make sense and put those pieces together. And journaling is so powerful to do that. It's a very reliable, loyal friend. Your journal will always be there for you. They're not going to be moody. They're not going to be unavailable. So that's really powerful. And then it helps build that relationship with the self, because we, again, can't have those meaningful connections with others until we have a healthy relationship with ourselves. And then mindful journaling is really just combining the benefits of mindfulness, which there's just a wealth of scientific information from almost every discipline you can imagine on mindfulness and its benefits. And so combining that with journaling is really powerful. So what is mindfulness? Many of you may know about this, many of you may not, but it is the practice of paying attention on purpose in the present moment to what you're experiencing without really judging what's happening or getting highly involved with it or interacting with it. So it's acceptance. And you can see how that really connects to a lot of what we've talked about with resiliency, with the temporal aspect of it, with the ability to absorb, difficult and traumatic things. And so what we know, the benefits of mindfulness, it helps us on every level. So cognitively, you can find tons of studies just showing enhanced decision-making, cognitive ability, studies with students preparing for entrance exams and how they do better when they practice mindfulness. Emotionally, we see decreases in stress, anxiety, and even depression with people who practice mindfulness. Psychologically, we see benefits too. People are just better able to develop themselves psychologically and kind of do the things that they need to do, persevere. Spiritually, connecting with that sense of meaning and purpose. Physically, we see studies that show stronger immune systems, a better cardiac health in some regards, and then just general well-being. So there's, again, if you go to Google Scholar and just search, be more specific with what you want, but on mindfulness, you'll find tens of thousands of articles. And so I have another slide on the benefits. I just kind of wanted to, these hit in a little different way. So state and trait effects, this is so cool. The individual that I got my mindfulness facilitation certification from is a neuroscientist. And so she was really interested in the effects on the brain. And so what's cool is when people are actually meditating or practicing mindfulness, they have a different, brain waves. We can see a difference, but there's also trait effects. So over time, gray matter actually shifts in the brain. So the parts of the brain that are more reactionary, like the limbic system, the default mode network areas, the gray matter shrinks, and then the more cognitive executive functioning areas increase. So we're really seeing the neuroplasticity. Mindfulness can change the brain to a certain degree. I already talked about stress and anxiety, more positive emotions and well-being. There's improved focus, memory, decision-making, decreased reactivity and improved mental agility and adaptability to stressful situations. Again, you can see this strong connection as to how this could help build resiliency resources, improve creativity. There's an enhanced self-awareness and emotional regulation and increased empathy and compassion. And it's just, if you have time to explore some of that, it's really fascinating information. So now we're going to shift and talk about some things that leaders can do to build resources, like on a team level or a social level. So this is just an idea that I really like. And this can be done by, on each unit, each work group, by whoever it could be the CLIN supervisor or whatever supervisor is in charge of that team, but just to do a check-in and do it in a color-coded way. So everybody knows yellow. If you're feeling yellow, that means you're feeling good. You're having a good day. If you're orange, you're okay, and then if you're feeling purple, not so good. And it's just great to build the dynamic where people can support one another, and also for the leader that day to kind of know how strong their team is. How are they feeling that day using this color code system? So you can just ask people to raise their hand. And if it's happening in a place where the public may be walking by, nobody knows what purple is, nobody knows what yellow is. So it's kind of a code within the group, but then the leader can say, well, if you're feeling yellow today, can you reach out to one of your teammates that raise their hand to be purple and help them through the day. And so we can begin to build an awareness of each other's needs and an ability to support one another. I also love this idea. I know we do a lot of huddles and rounding in the morning. I think it's a huge miss not to do it more towards the end of the day. But I like the idea of, instead of a cup of coffee to lift our spirits in the afternoon, what about a cup of gratitude? So I would love to see leaders getting trained on how to do this, but then leading to really bring gratitude, thanking the staff, but help the staff see the good work that they did during the day, the meaning and purpose that they created. And so these are just some ideas of things that could be asked during these rounds. What's been the greatest challenge today? And I will say, there are real challenges. There are really crappy situations happening. And so we don't want to dismiss that. We don't want to disrespect it. We don't want to sweep it under the rug. So there has to be an acknowledgement of what the struggle is in a very legitimate way. And if there's any action that that leader can take to advocate for that team, to resolve that problem, to support it, that needs to happen. But also another strategy is to say, hey, as a team, just whoever can gather around, can we come up with three things that went well today? And they could be little things, they could be big things. Definitely gives a leader an opportunity to recognize the staff. I'm envisioning someone maybe being, on a medical floor saying, the ED was so grateful for the way that you discharged patients this morning and made room for new admits. Thank you so much for your hard work, or whatever it is. So help them connect and see how what they're doing is positively impacting other areas of the organization. Maybe speak to something that a family member said, just anything that can help them see that all their hard work really is paying off and means something. Other things that the leader can do during these rounds is really role model how to reframe challenging situations in a more positive light. And we didn't have a lot of time today to go into that, but that is a key strategy for resiliency, is that ability to reassess, to reappraise, to be able to look at a situation in a different way. And so that's something the leader can, demonstrate with their personal stories, or if someone brings up something difficult, help them see a different way of looking at it. And then sense making is so powerful. So again, remember, that's a key piece of resiliency, is when we have a struggle, to try to put the chaos, if you will, in order. And a leader can really take the lead on that, and it can help them see purpose and meaning in the work that they've done or the struggle that they've been through. Another idea, everyone is working so hard. I know it's better now, but even just, 2 months ago, talking to frontline nurses, they weren't really getting lunch breaks. They weren't really getting breaks. And I think that it is better now, and people are starting to get breaks. Although I know many hospitals that I've been talking to recently, and I know y'all are not just working in hospitals, but there's such a shortage of nurses. So with less staff, even though there may not be a high COVID population right now, there's still maybe not enough people for everyone to get their breaks. And I think we need so hard to preserve that and give that to everyone who is working on the front line. But how can we make the break room feel like a real break from the work area? And so these are just some ideas to try to, when they walk through the doorway, the threshold, that they feel like they're going to get 15 minutes of a different experience. So you could have the staff come together to create a playlist of songs they all think are happy. You don't want anyone listening to a song they hate, so maybe everyone has the right to vote one off the list, but put something together that could be energizing, or it could be more spa music if that's good for that staff. Create the atmosphere. You could do aromatherapy and those little fake kind of safe candles. And then I think it's so important. A lot of people do have a bulletin board where they're putting notes from family members and showing appreciation. I love that. And I would also encourage team members to write notes to one another. And remember, with gratitude, the person writing the note of gratitude, as well as the one receiving it, receives a boost in positivity. So that may be a practice that's worth cultivating, because you can create a win for a couple of people and not just one person. This is another thing, for the sake of time, I almost didn't put in, but I actually had a meeting this week with a CEO that I was working with when the pandemic hit, and they had to cease and desist, working with me. And she's now, things are calming down, and she wanted to connect. And I have an accountability program, and this is a core piece of it, and it really connects to resiliency. And that is that we need to stay within our circle of control. And I just bring up that meeting this week because as the CEO was just kind of telling me their battle story, is sharing how they successfully got through some really difficult times, she brought, there's a poster that I have that has this on here, and it's just for a leader to help everyone say, hey, let's get back in our circle of control. Let's focus on the things we can control. And it was so touching, because she said, Beth, I can't tell you how many times during the pandemic we used that tool, because so much felt so out of control. So by helping followers, center back in on what they are able to change, what they are able to impact, helps decrease stress and anxiety. So this is a really very simplistic but powerful tool. And of course, on this slide, I just have a handful of questions that you might want to ask, just to help people get directed back, how can we solve this problem? Is there any action that we can take? Since such and such is out of our control, can we shift our perspective to lessen the negative impact of what's going on? And then just, I would encourage role modeling these types of behavior, guiding staff, and then just really calling them out in a positive way, recognizing them when they are putting their energy into their circle of control. All right, and then I think this is my last slide on what leaders can do. Leaders really do have a powerful impact, but that is to listen and really understand, use that temporal element, trying to bring people into the present moment, keep them grounded in the present. So, what's your biggest challenge right now? What's the most important thing for me to understand? And what's the one thing I can do for you right now? So again, that temporal element. I know that writing thank you notes takes time and it's not a new idea, but again, just drawing on the research around gratitude and the boost that can come to both the person writing the note and the person receiving the note, it may be worthwhile for leaders to embark on this in a way that isn't kind of quota driven, but more from their heart, so that they can fill their cup up too, as they just take a moment to really sense all the appreciation they have for hard work from different individuals. And then of course, sharing personal stories of intentional positive reframing and operating in your circle of control is a great way to role model. And as we kind of construct our reality as we tell our story. And so the more that we can verbalize and talk about the positive things, us handling things effectively, it really helps us too, as well as role modeling to staff positive things to do and good ways to handle things. So again, I warned you that you might see these things pop up. So building resources on the organizational level are all going to stem from what Shanna Felt identifies as drivers of engagement and burnout. And so to listen, to understand what organizational drivers are causing the greatest stress and address them for quick wins is really important. And again, I really see the quality professional as someone who has a great deal of expertise, not to take all this on as new work, just for you, but to be able to be a force, to be a part of a collaborative effort to drive the change, even just with, your Lean Six Sigma, your root cause analysis, your, 5 whys, your fish bones, trying to understand what are the greatest problems that can bring the greatest solution. And, I'm sure you've probably never done a project on how can we help our staff feel a sense of meaning and purpose in their work, but maybe you could, and maybe that would fill your cup up too. So I'm just throwing that out, hopefully challenging your thinking, getting some creative juices flowing, especially if you can see some of these issues not only causing burnout, but that burnout really impacting your ability to accomplish, patient safety metrics, quality of care metrics. So seeing how all this connects and what positive impact can you have, like pulling one lever, but, having an impact on multiple things. And then some other ideas that I really like are around distributing daily good news. And we have so many different electronic options to be able to do that now. And again, maybe that's an HR function. Maybe there's a communications person, marketing person within the organization that could just start to really push some kind of positive update out every day. And maybe they're already doing that, but I think that's so important, and that it's a meaningful bit of good news, and that most frontline staff are getting that message. I also think supporting both leaders and staff with sacred time to the best of our ability. So just ensuring that people are getting breaks during the day. A really tough workload is a very fast route to burnout. Schedules that ensure adequate time off. And I think it's really challenging because of the shortage of clinical staff right now. And that little issue alone, staffing, could be something that good process improvement methods might really contribute to and make a huge difference in safety, quality of care, and burnout. And then mindful meditations. I know there's a lot you can access online for free. I know some hospitals here in town have like a number that staff can call just to hear a very brief meditation. but there's tons of different services, a lot of things online for free. And I even have a couple on my YouTube channel. Like I have one meditation transitioning from work to home, because IHI identified that as a really crucial point, just to have, so people almost have clear thresholds they walk through so they can try to leave things behind. And then I have a self-compassion meditation and an empowerment one. And I'll share all those through Catherine and Jarvis, and they can send you that information out. And then I think leadership development and support is really important for, especially managers and directors, because this is such a tough time. And even though things are getting better with the vaccine, we are not out of this by the long shot. I think for the next 2 to 3 years, there's going to be a lot that we begin to deal with, and we need to really support leaders in that way. Okay, my goal was to get through this in 50 minutes, and I would love to take any questions. If anybody has any questions, you can, and we have about 37 people on the line, so you probably can just unmute yourself and ask a question if you'd like to. And I see someone asking if I would share my slides. I will. Oh, Misty Boone, hello. I'll definitely share my slides. I'd be happy to do that. And another thing I would love to tell you guys about, well, first of all, you can see if anybody has any questions and there's anything in particular they want more information about, just email me, beth@interactivequality.net. But I also wanted to share, because this is kind of my passion project that I'm working on right now. Let me see, I'm going to go to the next slide. Is this mindful journaling. And I have a new website called resiliency.well.com, and this is totally free. It's like a 7-day challenge where you can kind of try out for 7 days. And then I'm going to have like a 3-month program and a 12-month program. But I will tell you, the first 5 people who try it out and shoot me an email giving me some feedback on if they liked it, if they didn't like it, what worked, I'll give you a free membership to that journaling club, that mindful journaling club, if you'd like that. And I also have an active listening guide that I think is pretty good. I was going to see if Jarvis and Catherine could send that out. And I don't know if there's anything else that I mentioned during the talk. I'm happy to share any tools. Go ahead. Is somebody talking?
I'd like to ask a question.
Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Linda Heaps. I'm a nurse at JPS,
Oh, hey.
a nurse manager here at JPS in Fort Worth, Texas. And I have a question. We see a lot of, behavior issues in the units that is causing our nurses some distress and fearfulness sometimes when they come to work due to the behaviors of the patients. So would a project such as developing a resiliency program help to decrease that stress and fear of coming to work?
Well, so that's a great question. And I would say it can help them build their personal resources, but that alone probably isn't, that's a piece of the puzzle. But I think really addressing the problem, and I'm sure JPS is addressing the problem to the best of their ability. And I know, and I'm in the Dallas area, so I'm familiar a little bit with JPS. But I know that, there's different types of training that can be given. And I almost wonder, I'd have to know more about the specific situation before I just go out on a limb and make a recommendation and understand all the things that y'all are already doing to try to address that. But you almost wonder if, because everyone's hurting right now. Everyone's really at their worst. And so are there maybe some little resources that can be also provided to the family members, the behavior issue, the people having behavior issues, to just take the edge off a little bit. And I don't know what that would look like, or what that could look like with resources and whatnot, because that's the other thing is right now everyone is struggling with resources. So I think that's a great question, and I wish I had a better answer. I think any resource you give to the staff members will help them, but then it's almost like if we try to help everybody, like we do all kinds of mindfulness meditation or something, but the medical record is still a nightmare. We need to fix the medical record. And so if they're coming to work fearful for possibly, I mean, being hurt, physically and whatnot, that situation has to be addressed. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And actually, the organization does have a lot of things in place to manage patients with behavior on the units and throughout the organization. So, we have a lot in place, but just at a personal level for the nursing staff, for them to build their own resiliency when they're coming to work, to identify that, staying within their own scope, what can they control? Like you're saying, what can I control when I'm here? What I need to reach out, where do I need to pull in from help from somewhere else? So
yeah, and I do think I do think all that can be very helpful. And I mean, I have some different things I don't mind. Like, there's a steady and raise model, and there's a nurse, Audrey Cortez, out of Kerrville, Texas, that I've worked with, and she created that model and she put it in her organization, Peterson Health in Kerrville, probably like 3.5 years ago. And I mean, they have done incredibly well through COVID because that foundation was there, but it's really teaching some aspects of resiliency through the steady model, and then raise is what the leaders, are taught. And so, I have some of those resources. I will tell you that accountability program, there's a lot of that I've developed. There's a lot of overlap in that understanding of working in your circle of control and reframing. I mean, it really does build a lot of the personal resiliency resources. And then I think the mindfulness piece is huge. If not everyone will take to it, but if people are open to it, it can be incredibly powerful. And I think I might have seen Laura Burnside from JPS. I know that you guys have mindfulness things for your staff.
yes, we do.
Yeah, so that's really great. So yeah, I think anytime, like I kind of also love complexity theory, but one of the core things with complexity theory is when there's a complex problem, usually the solution is a little bit involved too. Like we always want to just have one simple, okay, this is the magic bullet. But oftentimes, I mean, everything that's happening right now as a result of COVID and the stressors, it is very complex. And so multiple things probably are going to have to be put in place to address a complex problem. But I hope you'll reach out to me. I'd be happy to schedule some time and just kind of brainstorm and share different resources that I have with you. I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
There. Any other questions? I'm going to stop sharing my screen, just kind of see, so I can see everybody. All right. Well, if anybody has questions, I would love for you just to unmute and ask them. And if not, we're about 3 minutes before the hour, so I can let everybody get on to their next event. And I'm going to look at the chat one more time. Oh, good. And somebody put in, Yvonne Aker, thank you, sharing tools from Duke. Awesome. I'm so glad everybody could come. It's a pleasure to be with y'all today. Thank you so much. Awesome. All right. Well, I'm going to sign off now. I just want to thank everyone again and thank the Georgia Association for Healthcare Quality. And I will be sending slides and resources through Catherine Garcia and Jarvis Gray. Take care, everybody.